people voting. And of the 29 people voting, 28 said no, they do not think that anyone will be held accountable. One person standing alone, the cheese to the alone, said, yes, I think somebody will be held accountable.
You can add me to nothing will come of it.
Yeah, add me as well. You can add me to that there, Richard.
Recording in progress.
Not all yourself.
So let's say good morning going out to Acting Superintendent of TTPS, Clair Guy-Alleyne. Good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning to you and your listening audience.
Yes,
everyone
morning.
in studio.
Yeah, well, I'm the only one in the studio. Paul is at home, Richard is at work.
We are all in studio, virtually or not.
Virtually, though, yes.
But Steve Little, archaic here.
He didn't wait for me to finish. I'm physically in the studio. But anyway, good morning to you. How are you doing?
I am fine.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yes.
All right.
I suppose we could start off with our poll. Is it superintendent?
Yes, acting superintendent.
Or acting superintendent?
Yes.
Yes.
So, but I might as well just say superintendent. Superintendent Guy-Alleyne. Our poll this morning was, do you think that anybody will be held accountable from the police investigation of the SABGA report? And we had 29 people voting this morning, and 28 of our listeners said no. They don't think anything or anyone will be held accountable coming out of the SABGA report and the police investigation thereof. And only one person said yes, they think somebody will be held accountable. Why do you think that there is such a negative perception or negative and or cynical perception of the outcome of this investigation by the police into the SABGA report?
But I don't want to speak much about the SABGA report because it's a matter that is under investigation. But what I can say is that we have a lot of persons who feel they are investigators, they feel they are law enforcement. The thing about it is that persons can only be held accountable once there is evidence of some sort of wrongdoing. You know, you don't just say, I feel this happened or somebody tell me this happened. You have to have concrete evidence in order to go before the courts of Trinidad and Tobago. The threshold for proving a criminal matter before the courts of Trinidad and Tobago is very, very high. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a lot of evidence. So you must start off with a victim or a survivor. You must have a victim or survivor statement. That is very, very critical. So I feel and I feel and I feel and I think and I think that is not evidence. That is just information.
Yeah. What is the objective of the investigation?
Well, the objective of the investigation is that allegations are being made. And once allegations are made, police officers or law enforcement are mandated to conduct investigation into the allegations. So what I want to do this morning, as I have this platform, is that if we have anyone who is listening, and you were a victim, you know, of that SABGA report, I am asking you to meet out to us at the police and let us conduct an investigation. Reach out to us because these matters, some of these matters, they are indictable matters and they do not have a statutory limitation per se. And the clock starts ticking for the statutory limitation when the report is made. So if you make the report today, it starts from today. So these matters, although they may have happened years ago, victims can still come forward and they can get justice. So I'm pleading with persons. I know some persons will feel a little funny to come forward, but I am asking persons come forward and let persons be held accountable for their wrongdoing.
Well, as you said before, you said there are allegations of wrongdoing.
Yeah. How are you going to build a case if somebody from 20 years ago comes out and says, well, I was in a children's home and I was abused? 25 years is a long time to get some level of success in a Trinidad and Tobago court. because a lot of the evidence that you require, a lot of it is going to be difficult to obtain at that point.
That is true. That is true. But let me tell you something. Where we need to start as police officers and law enforcement and investigators, we must start from a ground where you believe your victims. You see, when we speak like this and say, it happened 20-something years ago and these people cannot have justice, we create a kind of victim blaming and victim shaming. So victims would not come forward. They would not come forward. We have to create the platform and the atmosphere where survivors and victims can come forward, give their statements. Yes, we would not have evidence, for example, if it's a rape. You may not have clothing with semen. You may not have those kind of evidence. But we can still investigate the account of what you are telling us to see whether or not we have evidence to go forward. And the thing about it is that the police may not make a decision on its own. We have the Director of Public Prosecution as well, where we can go and seek advice.
Right. So the DPP can say whether the evidence you have meets the threshold that you mentioned before. But isn't the TTPS part? But isn't the TTPS possibly part of the problem? Historically, people who would have been abused in those children's homes, who would have made reports, would have felt that their reports weren't treated seriously, and or that they would have been laughed out or not treated with respect at whatever police station over the years. So hasn't TTPS in itself contributed to the state where we are in now? Or you don't think so?
Well, I have not spoken to a victim who gave that account. But if that happened, that is really sad, because when victims come forward, we as police officers, we are held at a higher threshold. We are supposed to be investigators. We are supposed to provide quality service to the public. And if the service that we are providing within the TTPS is not of a standard that a victim or a survivor, should obtain, they need to report that officer and let disciplinary action take place.
Yeah.
Don't take
but
that.
I take it now. I take it now that the TTPS is more prospectively more vigilant on those sorts of issues and those sort of complaints, and what's the trajectory in terms of if you're not getting satisfaction. But going back years, I'm just talking about that. Historically,
because there were reports about, for example, it may not be in alignment with the Sabga report, but there were reports, Mrs. Guy-Alleyne, about the Akil Chambers case, for instance, where there seem to have been flaws in police process. I just want to ask a question about, while I agree with what you said earlier on, and witness accounts and testimonies are important at this stage more than ever before, because, as Richard said, of the lack of possible evidence some 25 years later. How, and because you're the head of the division, how is the police going to deal with, or how are the police going to deal with possible re-victimization of persons coming 25 years later now to be associated in a very public way, possibly, with these allegations and, in some instances, crimes, where 25 years ago was one thing, but now, if your name gets out there, you are now all over social media, all over the news, because the story has that kind of energy, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. I love that question. You see, the police service has evolved over the years. For example, our current commissioner, Commissioner Jacob, he would have sent some officers. I was one of them. Assistant Commissioner of Police Sharon Cooper and ASP Bridgell. We went to New York, to NYPD last year, where we were trained on special victims investigation. We were taught how to be victim-centered. We were also trained a couple months ago by the British High Commission as well on sexual investigation and sexual assault. So we have evolved over the years, and training and retraining is happening within the organization. So we have a cadre of officers, and eventually all officers will become victim-centered and perpetrator-focused. We also have the support of the Victim and Witness Support Unit within the organization that assists with psychosocial support. So the Victim and Witness Support, they are going to walk that victim. From the time that victim comes forward and we are conducting that interview, the Victim and Witness Support officers will be calling immediately, because we know about trauma. We were also trained in being trauma informed, because trauma is real. You know, so be even listening on the radio and the TV and hearing about the SABGA report and knowing that you may have been a victim or you were a victim, that traumatizes you. So when persons come forward, we are trained to understand that. So the psychosocial support will be kicked in immediately. You understand?
Is the TTPS open to, because in addition to victims, or I prefer the word survivors, quite frankly, coming in to give their own accounts, how is the TTPS going to deal with possible third-party accounts and persons who may have known about it but not been able to give accounts? Or is that going to be now considered hearsay or third-party reports?
When you say third-party reports, like the person was a child at the moment and you had a third-party adult who was aware of the incident, the sexual assault?
Yes, or someone else who may have been aware of it but did not come forward at that time. They may not have been a survivor or victim themselves, but they may have seen or heard about the report at the time in terms of your evidence gathering or your testimony gathering, account gathering.
Correct. And that adult under the Sexual Offences Act that was amended, depending on the year, they would be held accountable, especially if they're a caregiver, a parent, a guardian, a social worker. They would be held accountable.
So then why would I come in and give testimony to implicate myself, if that's the case?
If you're coming to give testimony to implicate yourself?
Yeah, the scenario I'm describing is I was privy to somebody getting raped. I may have been very young at the time and not think I had the agency to go and report it. But now that the information is being investigated again, I want to come forward. That's the kind of scenario I'm describing. Will that be accepted?
Well, you can come forward. You can come forward if the investigator is of the opinion that you should be held accountable according to the law. You would be cautioned. You would be cautioned, because we cannot. I don't want to. We cannot ambush. We cannot ambush witnesses, right? If you come forward and you give an account, you were witness and whatever, the police would investigate the matter. And depending on the laws, we would know whether or not you were one of the categories of persons who are supposed to be held accountable. So an investigation would be conducted. We treat each case on its own merits.
Is part of the investigation not necessarily of this particular report, but in the division itself, given what we've seen in the public domain about children's homes and the lack of standard of care? I look at children's homes in general in Trinidad and Tobago because of how we're hearing about these substandard care protocols, in some instances outright abuse, to be more proactive.
We need to care and love our children a little bit more. And institutions that house children, we should be cutting edge. We are in 2022. So these institutions should be cutting edge.
But because we know we're not, sorry to interrupt, but we know we're not. We are in many cases falling short. So are we going to continue to wait until the perpetrator's abuse? I think she got cut off. We keep saying we have to love our children, Richard and Steve. We have to do better. But are we doing better, or are we just waiting for reports of abuse to come out to make a big hullabaloo? Are we going into these institutions and investigating their standard of care even before the reports or the allegations come to light to make sure that they're holding this standard? Or are we going to continue waiting until children come out and say, well, I've been abused for 5 years or 6 years ago?
She's back online.
Yes, Mrs. Guy-Alleyne, you're back?
Yes, Mr. Richards.
Yeah, the question is, are we going to be proactive? Yes, we know we're supposed to love our children. Yes, we know we're not supposed to abuse them, but we have seen over and over instances where these institutions are not upholding the standard. Is it that the TTPS is now going to work with the Children's Authority to go in and do spot checks to ensure that the children are being cared for at the standard they should be, or are we going to wait until after the allegations come out or have been abused 3 years ago, 6 months ago, to do the work afterward?
I like that. Be proactive. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna make visits. We do patrol the children's homes, but what we're gonna do, we're gonna have a closer eye on these institutions. So that children would feel comfortable when they see police officers, to be able to make reports, feel comfortable to come forward. Because sometimes what we have happening is that once a child does not feel comfortable with you as an adult, you could be a police officer or social worker. Once that child does not feel comfortable, that child will disclose nothing to you. That child will wait until that child becomes an adult person, and then they may speak amongst their peers or their friends and let them know what happened to them 10 and 20 years ago. So we have to create that atmosphere. And I'm thinking that the police, we're going to have a closer relationship with the children's home, just to ensure that children are comfortable and they understand that if something is happening to them, you can come forward to the police and make the report.
Superintendent, I know. If you could just clarify, I know you did it at the start of the interview, but if you could clarify it again for our listeners, the extent of your investigation, is it to all the children's homes and all of the reports that are coming out now, or is it specifically to the SABGA report?
Well, any allegations of any abuse to any child, whether it's physical or sexual, any reports that we have with respect to that, whether it's the SABGA report, whether it's the Judith Jones report, or any home right now, anything involving children where physical assault, any kind of abuse is taking place, we would investigate it. We have the capacity, we have the officers that are highly trained, elite officers to deal with these matters.
Yeah, because I was just, the only reason I asked, because I wasn't sure of how wide a scope it was going to be, because I was on social media last night and I saw interview, even though the person wasn't visible, the boy that was talking, and he was talking about his experience in one of those homes for boys. And I think he escaped with a couple of those guys who eventually killed. 2 boys had escaped, and I think they went to a house and they were eventually killed. I think he was one of those that escaped with them, if I'm understanding correctly. And a lot of the abuse was perpetrated by security officers, according to him.
Wow.
And of course, he was a member, well, he is a member of the LGBTQ community. And he was saying he was particularly targeted, and others who had that sexual orientation. And he says it was abuse. I mean, standing up on their heads, and it was horrible listening to it. I had no reason, and I'm just wondering, Say that again?
I truly wish that he can come forward and let us interview him, record statements.
Well, I mean, hopefully Sherma Wilson is listening, and if she is, Sherma could maybe get it onto you, because I think it was on her page that I saw that interview with that guy. Well, heard it, because you didn't see him. Yeah.
Mr. Khan, let me tell you something. We are also trained to deal with LGBTQI. We are also trained, to operate in a level of confidentiality. We are trained. So I am asking that person if he can come forward, and let us investigate the matter.
But should we be surprised that you are asking for that person to come forward, given the high-profile nature of that escape from that children's residence, the subsequent death of the 2 boys, I think, associated with the escape, and now it's surprising to hear that the other boys who escaped were not debriefed by the police. Given the fact that they seem to all have escaped together, 2 were killed. Am I wrong, Richard?
Yeah, I think he did. He was one of the escapees. I think several of them escaped at that point.
So I'm surprised that the police have not debriefed that young man, having escaped the residence at that time and being part of the group, that you're asking him to come forward, as opposed to him having been identified as somebody who may have endured some trauma or was part of an escape from an institution and should have been debriefed at some level by the division by now.
Well, I stand to be corrected, but I think he is still at large. I'm standing to be corrected, because Paul, like I explained to you, sometimes once these people don't feel comfortable around you, they would not disclose anything. So if he was found and he was debriefed, once he was not comfortable with you as a law enforcement officer, he would say, I just ran away because I wanted to run away and go by a friend. But I would check the records to see whether or not he is still at large or whether he was found.
Yeah. And is it part of the problem too? Is I don't think they feel comfortable that if they go to the state machinery, they're just going to be put back into the abusive environment.
Correct.
And they don't want to go back.
Mrs. Guy-Alleyne, given your exposure to international training, do you think, are you surprised by the reports you're hearing even now about the kind of substandard care we're hearing at so many homes in this country related to children's care?
Yeah, it's really, really sad. It's really, really sad. And we don't have concrete evidence because persons are not coming forward. You always hearing someone saying, I feel this and I hear this. And, we want people to come forward, give the statements, give a proper account, so that we can have concrete evidence to say, here's what, this is going on at this home, that is going on at that home.
But isn't part of the protocol involved here? And I hear you with the come forward call, but shouldn't the TTPS and the Children's Authority be going into these homes with psychologists who can get past the barriers to disclosure with some of these children? Because we know that children generally shut down if they're subject to abuse. We know that they fear more authority figures coming in and asking questions in a situation where, in some instances, the very perpetrators are standing right with the law enforcement and others, and they're afraid to talk. And to me, some different approach should be taken to get the children in a more candid environment so you could get the information you need to establish the standard of care is happening.
And
as opposed to asking children in those vulnerable situations who are unlikely because they're in a vulnerable situation to come forward. Those children are not going to come forward.
Gentlemen, let me tell you something. If we have an allegation, and those are my instructions within the Special Victims Department, which encompasses the Child Protection Unit, the Gender-Based, and the Sexual Offenses Unit. My instructions are, for example, I'll give you an example. We have situations where mother and father is separated, and an allegation would be made against another parent. My instructions to my investigators, we find an independent person to interview that child. You don't want to interview the child in the presence of, for want of a better word, the good parent, the one that came to make the report or came with the allegation to the police. It's a similar situation. If an allegation is made at a children's home, we do not interview the children at the children's home. We immediately contact Children Authority and we remove the child from the children's home and we go to one of the assessment centers at the Children Authority where we would interview the child just as the other one with the two parents, the two separated parents. We go to the Children Assessment Center where this interview would be held by a caseworker of the Children Authority, because you cannot interview children by themselves. You must have a responsible adult. And the Children Authority, they provide that independent person for us. So the child is not interviewed at the home in the presence of the alleged quote-unquote offender. We take them away from that situation. But like I tell you, once a child is not comfortable, they would not disclose.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at the picture of child abuse in Trinidad and Tobago, especially these children's homes, it's part of the problem, our culture of violence towards children that sometimes comes under the sobriquet of discipline. So that parents, and I don't know what the TTPS position is on parents flogging their children under the sobriquet of discipline or using physical remedies or physical violence against their children under the sobriquet of discipline, which is accepted by many Trinidadians and Tobagonians, and who many parents jealously protect that right to be physical with their children. So if you have that culture of violence that comes under discipline, then when you go into children's homes and they are disciplining children, it opens this wide ambit for abuse to take place when it crosses those lines, because those lines are very blurry and it is condoned. The law condones it.
Well, let's ask the question, is physical interaction with children allowed at children's homes under the law? Because I know parents can do it to their children. It can't happen in schools anymore, but is it allowed in children's homes under the law?
It is not allowed in children's homes. And just like Mr. Khan was alluding to, I can tell you, children practice learned behavior.
This is not Mr. Khan, this is Richard.
Oh, it's Mr. Richard.
Right. Great offense at being called Mr. Khan this morning.
Who was speaking before? Mr. Richard?
Yes, but my voice is clearly more discernible, but you were talking to Richard Ragoobarsingh before, who clearly sounds a lot like Steve Khan. But go ahead, Mrs. Guy-Alleyne.
Yes, okay. Yes, but corporal punishment is only a parent, and the parent has to be reasonable. We have charged parents, we have charged teachers, we have charged persons, for administering corporal punishment, which was not reasonable.
What is reasonable?
And just like was said before, it's blurry. So I advise parents and caregivers to stay away from corporal punishment. Let us not make children feel that violence is a way to deal with conflict. We can sit a child down and have a conversation. We can take away screen time. We can take away the phones. We can take away devices. We don't have to, you don't have to meet children out with violence in order to correct them. And I don't like the word, not discipline. Sometimes they use a word, it doesn't come to me right now, but when
punishment?
Punishment, I don't like that word at all. When it comes to children, because children should be nurtured. Children should be nurtured. We need to correct children, not punish them. Punishment is for prison, the big prison, adults. Punishment is for adult persons. When you are dealing with children, you use terms as correcting. Because we are supposed to nurture children as adults and parents and caregivers.
I want to move the conversation a bit to the issue of intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and we've seen a lot of those instances in the last couple of weeks or so. That tragic case, which you were kind enough to correct for the public, where Miss Mohammed, I think it's her name, was killed, and the initial reports erroneously stated that the police did not intervene. What is the police protocol in that instance? So someone makes a report, and the police, by my understanding, in that case, took the woman away from the situation, advised the woman, and she went back. What is the general protocol for the police service in those instances? Is it that, and I understand they weren't living together, so he couldn't be removed from the house because he wasn't living with her. He lived close to her. How do you operate in those circumstances? And can the police arrest someone and charge off of a report of violence, domestic violence or abuse?
The thing about it is that we need the public to understand. whenever you make a report and the police is advising you, because one of the options we would give you is the shelter. But a lot of persons, a lot of survivors do not like to go to the shelters because when you're at the shelter, you cannot use your phone. Sometimes the shelters may not have space. But if a police officer indicates to you, please do not go back to the home. If you are going back to the home, have police escort. We are asking survivors to just listen. I know it's a lot of emotions, and a lot of time, especially women. Women always feel that they can change a man. I always advise, if a man tells you he's going to kill you, he's going to injure you, believe him and take evasive actions immediately. Leave, block him on the phone, obtain a protection order. You take steps to protect yourself. Women always feel that they can change a man. He's not capable. I have heard it many times. No, he's just joking. Joking? I don't take those things as jokes. No way.
And what happens when, because I've heard some instances where the protection order is granted, it actually enrages the man more and he goes directly to hurt the woman.
It enrages him more because the probably it's not explained to him properly. That protection order, and that is another thing. A lot of persons will say protection orders it's just a piece of paper. But if you use the protection order as it is supposed to, because we have applicants, that is the person who applies for the protection order. We have applicants who would assist in breaching the protection order because, they have this honeymoon period in the relationship where they feel that they miss the respondent and they would go back. And one of the conditions of the order is that they should not be in the same place and whatever. We have applicants who would assist the respondent in breaching those orders. We need people to adhere to the orders. We need police officers when they are going to serve the respondent, that is the alleged perpetrator, when they are going to serve the respondent, to clearly read the order out to the respondent and let him understand what is going on. You let him understand this order is to even protect him as well as the applicant or the victim or the survivor. So we need.
But how much of that actually occurs, Superintendent? Because I hear you, and you've been trained. But how much training goes on with those servers of those orders, in terms of explaining it the way you are saying it should be done?
Well, the TTPS is evolving, and training and retraining is constant. Right? So officers understand that they're supposed to read the orders and explain the order, even ask the respondent if he understands what is going on. You don't just go and you throw an order at somebody's feet or anything like that. You have to sit with the person and explain the order to them.
No, I understand that. I'm just wondering, yeah. I hear you saying what the best practice is, but for a lot of Trinidadians and Tobagonians, they don't necessarily always encounter the best practice when they interface with the TTPS. So,
how much of a complication is it? And it is a two-part question. Can and should somebody who may not be in the household, but who is hearing about the abuse, hearing the fights and hearing the threats in some instances, may not see but hear the violence, make that sort of report? And is that sort of report binding enough for the police to investigate? And if they investigate, what is the next step in those kinds of circumstances? Because very often we hear, if you see something or hear something, say something. And people do, but they may not be actually in the household. It may be a neighbor that we always hear, well, we know that X and Y, she was getting licks for years, you understand? We always hear about those stories. We know she's been abused for years, but no one made a report because, well, they feel it's none of their business, or they feel the police can't act on that report because they're not in the household themselves.
And that is real. We have had reports where neighbors or even family members would call us and say, here what, the neighbors are fighting. And we would respond. So persons can make reports in those ways. We have persons making reports on the TTPS app. We have persons making those kinds of reports on the online reporting, and the police would respond. And sometimes when we respond, we may get several responses from the household. You would hear them saying, "We just had a quarrel. We just had a misunderstanding." The other thing that happens is that we may have somebody now reporting it to us from the household, the victim or the survivor, saying, "Yes, he slapped me yesterday, he assaulted me," and then the investigation commences. So making a report because you hear some loud explosion or you hear quarreling is excellent. We are asking and encouraging persons to do that.
Is your division getting more resources or less resources in the last couple of months?
We have been getting resources incrementally from the inception of the unit until present. We have been getting resources incrementally.
So resources, well, I mean, not say it's not an issue, but you have been getting the level of resources, given the fact that your mandate is increasing every week.
Yes, it is. But
do you think the public is getting the message about?
Function.
Do you think the public is getting, because part of this, the responsibility on the public also, it's not only on the TTPS, and the public has to change its attitude to one, children, as Richard said, and two, intimate partner violence. Is the public getting the message?
I would say yes. I would say yes because we do a lot of outreach programs with respect to child abuse and gender-based violence. We do a lot of outreach programs. We partnership with NGOs, ministries. We conduct booths at different areas. We do a lot of Zoom because of the COVID. We have done a number of outreach programs to just sensitize the public, let them understand if you see something, say something. If you're an abused person, if you know a child that has been abused, the process, what should be done. We have been conducting that, and
not meaning to interrupt you, but hasn't that been going on for years? That you all have been doing that sort of outreach?
Yes, we have been, but
so in other words, you're doing what you're doing, what you've always been doing. What is the difference in what you're doing? I think is what Paul is asking. What is different?
We are doing more.
Yeah.
We have increased. We have ramped up. We have moved away from, let's say, you know, the normal thing is to go into Port of Spain. You go into Port of Spain on the Brian Lara Promenade. You go to a mall. What we are doing now, we are going into communities. You know, the communities that may not be able to come out to us, we are going into those communities, right? Sometimes we do walkabouts and give out pamphlets. Let persons understand if something is happening, where you can call. Because, and let me tell you something, I am very amazed because no matter how much outreach you do, we always meet communities. "Oh, I didn't know," and "Oh, thank you so much. We are so happy." Yes, we are happy that the TTPS is doing all this good job. So we will continue to go into depressed communities. We will go into communities that cannot come to us or come into Port of Spain in the big, you know, when we have these big caravans in Port of Spain, some persons cannot reach there. So we will go into those communities and speak to those persons.
Do you have, when you go to these communities, is it that you go door to door or do you do these group meetings? Because one of the issues that arises in neighborhoods because of the kind of culture we have in Trinidad and Tobago is that every time people see police put up in front of your door, curtains start to pull, neighbors start to talk, they grab their cell phone. "Oh my God, when you see the police coming from the Ragoobarsingh house?"
Yes.
As opposed to it being a normal thing for police to go house to house and just find out how the residents are doing, so that when police pull up, it's not so much of maybe an incident, but it's just police interfacing with the public in a collegial manner. Is that part of your new approach? Because when you know how it goes in neighborhoods, from the time police pull up in front of the house is bacchanal.
You are correct, and that is why our unit at the Special Victims Department, we wear plain clothes. So it's not a uniform officer showing up at your place. Yes, so your neighbor, you know, some people would not know it's actually police officers. What we do sometimes is that we may set up a tent. We may set up a tent somewhere. We'll have the sign of the unit, the gender-based or the child protection. We'll have the sign, and then we will do walkabouts from door to door. And persons really do appreciate that. Sometimes we go up to Rio Claro. I remember several times we went up to Rio Claro, and we were on the main road in Rio Claro, just interfacing and speaking with the public. And they really, really enjoyed that. They appreciated that.
And I think all of those things are helpful, but I think there has to be a concerted effort if Trinidad and Tobago is serious about, if we're talking about domestic violence, it has to be a concerted marketing effort that says 0 death from domestic violence. And it has to be an interlinking between the Ministry of National Security, the TPS, including of course the TTPS, the Ministry of Health and Social Services. And it has to be that hospitals are aware if a woman comes in or a man comes in with anything, it's an alert. You have to have psychologists who are intervening in family situations. It has to be aggressive.
Yes.
Because it is happening with such frequency, the output from the state has to be aggressive, and it has to be a focus on 0 deaths from domestic violence in Trinidad and Tobago, and that has to be the goal. And the goal has to be several agencies working in tandem, and that messaging wherever you go, from schools, including the Ministry of Education, by the way, schools, hospitals, health centers, social services, and the kind of professionals involved. So if a woman says a man is X, the man is mandated to get anger management. So the law, all of that has to be, we have to get serious about it and stop the basic, not meaning to negate what you're doing, but the basic outreach, setting up a booth and handing out pamphlets, that ain't working.
No. We have to do that. You see everything that you just said, along with the giving out of the pamphlet and moving from house to house, we have to marry everything. We have to have a multi-sectorial approach. And let me tell you something, you mentioned something there, the health centers and the hospitals. Now, the TTPS, we are moving, my office is going to be across by Sinclair on Serpentine Road. And the Commissioner of Police right now, that building is prepared in such a way. The Special Victims Department, the entrance to get to that Special Victims Department is not where the general public will be passing. So the Special Victims, once you are going to the Special Victims, you use another entrance in the building. I am saying at the health centers, they should organize that as well. Because from the time a victim walks in the normal way where the public walks, the victim starts, persons must just be watching the victim with nothing in their minds, But a victim feels that, oh my God, this person is looking at me. They know I have been abused. So we need different entrances. So we need to marry everything that you say along with the outreach and the sensitization. Because if persons don't know where to go, what to do, and what to expect, there's where it starts. Yes?
Yep.
Well, we're out of time. Superintendent, thank you for being with us this morning. We appreciate your time and your contribution.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you so much, Acting Superintendent, TTPS.
Recording stopped.
Clair Guy-Alleyne. All right, let's get into our news brief, all powered by Champlain Auto Services.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.